Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look to the behind the headlines on the stories that make us tick. Well, I hope you're having a calm, controlled Thursday morning, because we're about to descend into chaos. Chaos is the name of a really wonderful book I just read, a sci-fi love story by Constance. She's here going to talk to us about the book, and I have a lot I want to ask her about how we're going to relate to each other as people and people and robots, people as hybrids. Got a lot to talk about. Constance, thanks so much for coming on Dateline New Haven. Okay, I'm not hearing you. Hold on one second. Let me see what are you muted? Okay. Hold on one second. We're going to go back to music. I have to ask our station manager what's up with the Zoom. My apologies for that. And be right back. Oh, yeah, I can hear you now. Are you there?
Fantastic. I changed microphones.
Oh, okay. So I'm glad for the first time it wasn't on our... But, you know, your books, I think you know a lot about tech. You might not have gotten the phone working, but boy, a lot of crazy stuff happens in your book, Chaos. What year is this book sent in?
I do not know. It's sort of an alternate universe. So it's something that I try to keep Earth references away from. So it's, I guess, sort of like Star Wars a long, long time ago, but in a galaxy far away, or sort of a timeless but futuristic-ish place.
And I guess you brought up Star Wars. It's really two different kind of books to me. Mm-hmm. In one sense, it's a book that's like people who like to see either Marvel superhero books or Star Wars with a kind of planetary combat and the different clans and the people kind of taking each other over, and a lot of action. A lot of times when like your main character is a Caro Oguniemi. Mm-hmm. Is that how you say it? And she's a planet-hopping engineer and mercenary and kind of badass woman who fights everybody and has a lot of idealism deep down and event stuff. And so that's one kind of book it is. The reason I actually, after reading about it in the Times, I wanted to read it and really enjoyed it. This is also a love story, right? It's about Caro is on a mission to free captives in a distant planet prison. And it's being transformed into, these people are being transformed into program robot like super warriors. And it's all being done with this horrifically enhanced coding this woman had developed. So she's not happy about that. But she also falls in love with a person who becomes a part robot. And she also has this separate relationship where she's trying to free everyone and all the drama. And you can see the movie scenes when you're reading the books almost in your mind with an actual robot who then takes on human-like characteristics and consciousness and feelings. Is that a good way to put it?
I think so, definitely. I think it would be horrifically offended at being told it had human-like characteristics and feelings, but yes.
Right. But it takes a risk for its own life to help someone as human because it seems like it believes in the mission the woman has and has, cares about what happens to her and that kind of stuff and saves her. So how conscious was this? You've written a whole series of these kind of books. This is a series itself. And I know you're very focused on women characters in sci-fi and action, which is really cool. And I want to ask about that a little later. But how conscious was this in your mind when you wrote this book about the whole discussions we're having now to define beings and consciousness? We're saying, we're all saying what's happening now when we're all becoming part hybrid humans and, reactors to algorithms and technology enhanced decision making. How much was that in your mind when you wrote this book?
I think it's hard to escape it in the modern day. My day job is in technology, and I like writing things that involve technology too. And I think it's a question we all ask, whereas, the AI quote that we have right now isn't truly AI in any sort of, sci-fi reader's
Well, it's not AGI, right? It's not,
right.
It hasn't reached having its own consciousness.
Right. And even really thinking, it hasn't reached really the point of thinking yet. But I think that's on many people's minds of what happens when/if it does. And what happens to us when it does, not necessarily in the Terminator pew pew way, although that's a fun way. Well, not fun for the humans in it, but fun for a reader. But it's also just like, what does that mean for our place in the world? What does that mean for what we do, for what we are supposed to do, for how we navigate our lives?
No, it's interesting, and I agree that the nightmare scenarios are not nightmare scenarios. Convergence, all that is far off. May or may never happen. I'm noticing a lot of writing now, both in fiction and in journalism, about the evolution of our relationships with technology and with simulations of consciousness, right? Even though they don't have consciousness. Like I'm sure you read Kashmir Heroes articles in the Times where, people fall in love with the chatbot that gets them to subscribe more. And that's kind of scary. Or people have killed themselves in a few cases because of the advice they get with the chatbot to come and defend themselves. But I'm also thinking, when you were saying we're not there yet, when we have decisions about what we're going to buy at a store or how many steps we're going to take in a day based on how we're being monitored, to my insurance company wants to beep every time I hit the brakes, whether or not they know, whether I'm going to hit another car. Do you think we're partly along the way of fudging the line between human and technology, human and another form of consciousness?
We are already so reliant on technology for everything we do. I mean, people wear smartwatches. People are, even if you're not putting something into ChatGPT to answer your question, you might still be Googling it. You might still be. So we are offloading a lot of our thinking into technology. And we are also inundated in it or with it in a way that humans, I don't know, I think it's up for debate. And I've read a lot of articles on the subject, and it's interesting to think of how much human minds were meant to know at one time and how many opinions we were meant to get at one time, and what that does to you psychologically. Because I think we are definitely a long way down that road, not necessarily in that, we have robot hands, although some people have robot hands, but in the sense that a lot of neural and psychological things are also kind of behind the scenes being impacted by technology in ways that a great weird example is audiobooks. So most people who listen to audiobooks, maybe not many people who listen to audiobooks, listen to it at a faster speed so they can go through the book much more quickly. But because of that, audiobook narrators have to modify the way they narrate for that speed, because we aren't used to hearing people talk at 1.3 or 1.5 or even 2 times speed. And so even little things like that are technological are changing the way we experience media and the way that we experience stories, because it's very different than, the very old-fashioned, we're going to sit by a fire and tell a tale. If you're driving in your commute, so you're in a machine and you're driving in traffic being guided by your GPS machine, and you are listening to a machine tell you a story in a way that the story is natural, but a way that you are listening to the story is not natural. So there, I think, we're very far down that road.
And in truth, the book was technological change from going around the campfire. So how does that affect when people read your book? How do you feel they experience your story, feels chaos different from when they hear an audiobook versus sit down and read it the way I did?
Well, unfortunately, chaos isn't available in audiobook.
Okay.
But the other books in the series are. And I think it's just different. People like to approach media in different ways. So I think that
so more is better.
Yeah, I listen to audiobooks. I read hard books. I read books on e-readers. I think all of those are valid ways to get the story, depending on how your brain works and how you like to get the story. But it is a different experience getting the story in each of those ways. So they're all valid, but it's a different experience, clutching your phone 2 inches from your face, getting like light washing your face right before bed, from, having a warm lamp on and reading a book in your lap, to having earphones in. It's a different experience.
Although with the warm lamp I had before I went to bed, it was hard to get to bed some nights because of these like thrilling scenes when she's almost going to die. So we're talking about Chaos, a sci-fi love story newly published by Constance on Bramble Tor Publishing or Macmillan imprint. And so I guess what I want to get back to here when you talk about, so in your book, you have very, along that continuum of how we're evolving human and how we interact with technology, I think it kind of gets to who we are as human and why we live and how we relate to each other. So Constance, your main character. So on the one hand, she's relating to other humans, right? She's a mercenary. She goes planet to planet. She figures out how to take on a job that isn't necessarily always, though we find out she's idealistic, is who's paying you somewhat, right? But she has
Mm-hmm.
other human relationships with people she's on a team with, and she's willing to risk her life sometimes to save them. In this, was I found interesting from the beginning of this book, she's then offered a job to go break into this planetary prison where she gets a video of this sort of Frankenstein-like super powerful robotic soldier who was a human being that through a misuse of her own coding was turned into a super soldier is being developed. And she kind of falls in love with him just watching the video before she meets him. And a lot of what she does in the action of this book is driven by wanting to be with him. And then the third one, as we mentioned, we'll get to later, was one of the actual robots who's a guard in this prison who ends up helping her rather than preventing her. What were you thinking about there? How's in the plot? Do you agree that it's sort of like a story, a romance story about three different kinds of relationships, human, android, human, robot? And if so, where does that put us in the continuum of how we're evolving as a species in relationship to technology?
Interesting question. I agree. I think it is about different kinds of relationships and different, I think it is human android, I would say, is not even that in the context of a story like this. There's many stories where a human android relationship could be vastly different. In this one, it's more different in terms of like, is he going to murder you versus is he a good
Gonna make
person?
love to her, yeah.
Yeah. And the human android definitely is, or human robotic android is definitely very different. So yes, it is about, I think, Caro as a character being an engineer, being a technologist, and being both arrogant and empathetic is
Oh, she's a great
perfectly
character.
suited. Yeah, for this, because she sees a problem and it never really occurs to her that she can't solve the problem.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, hey, this very attractive man wants to murder me. Well, I can fix that. Everyone's a fixer-upper of a kind.
But she also saw the humanity in him from day one.
Yes.
And so that's what I think is different from how, like, Clara and the Sun, where that's actually a robot who becomes a little more human, has the relationships, or Blob. I don't know if you read that, the recent one where this mask gets turned into a creature. I think what's interesting about her relationship with the human who had become a programmed killer robot is that she's returning his humanity to him. That's kind of one of the big storylines here of can he come back to being not the human he was. The human has been changed, but human again. And as you know, I'm an older person, and I've noticed how lifespans are being extended through a lot of technology and drugs, and where we're becoming parts of ours aren't human anymore. We're becoming a lighter version of this character. Were you saying that? Were you exploring whether it's possible? What are the limits and the potential of retaining humanity in the way our humanity is chipped away at by technology?
Yeah, I think I try for all of my books, even though they can be incredibly violent and that sort of thing, to have a hopeful tone for all that. And I think that that's sort of the point of the story, right? Is that the Levi, the male lead, is not who he was before and will never be who he was before. But that doesn't mean he is not a person. That doesn't mean he is not human. That doesn't mean he can't rediscover who he can be. And maybe there's even more possibilities in who he can be than in who he was.
Well, I wonder when they turned him into a killer robot and not really human in that moment. I'm even thinking back to the first Gulf War. I know this can sound bizarre to you. Was Saddam Hussein ordered that the soldiers be given cocaine so they could fight around the clock and not have control over the normal human cycle of what they can do? And that's, again, why I'm thinking here, not only whether turning people into robots, but whether you can turn them into people who can still have leisure or create or live the way younger people do as they get older and do become less human in the project. Because what's so interesting to me is in the end, Caro was rescuing Levi from being less than human. And I wonder, are there more potentials of how we can still be human? Is there a lesson here of how we might still be able as a society to retain our humanity, both in ourselves, what we're meant to be, our purpose, but also in how we relate to each other as we surrender some of our autonomy and some of our basis of who we are? for
Yeah,
enhanced
I think
abilities.
the goal for all of us, in that is to try to retain part of our humanity, right? It's like, oh, well, I remember back in the day when I used to do this and it was so fun. And I remember when I was 30 pounds lighter, or I remember
Or
when,
Ozempic now makes you instantly
yeah,
skinny. Yeah.
I remember when I had this, can I have it again? And I mean, I think the answer is yes and no, right? You can get closer than you were before,
But it's
but
not the
it's not
same.
what you had. Yeah, it's you are still not 20 on the beach, you're 40 on the beach. And you can have a great time at 40 on the beach, 60 on the beach, 80 on the beach, but it's not when you were 20 on the beach. And I think that's in the way of this story, kind of where GR81, the robotic character, comes in that, you know, you can Levi spends a while trying to get back what he had before, realizes he can't, but the robot never had it before. Like the robot was not a person. It was
Well,
it was an
Victor,
it.
one of your characters, does disagree with you on page 257. Says that I love this, GR81 is not a human but a person because Caro
Yes.
gets so sad when he dies. Well, it's not a
Hmm.
he, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's it though, right? That it's not a human. It wasn't a human, it wasn't a person, but it finds its own way of being a thinking, conceptualizing being that makes choices and can make those choices for empathetic and human, person
Which was sort of
reasons.
the Claire of the Sun idea. I think
Yeah.
often some of the people who dive deepest into dystopian future and scenarios, which you do in parts of this book, and a lot of sci-fi people do, are often the most idealistic, or this it's a hard fought optimism. Like you show that love in this book can conquer, can persevere, but it's not the exact same kind of love, right? Like
Hmm.
where does love come from? Where do we come out of love when we've become more technologized, more algorithm driven, more part human, part person? Are you thinking at all here in anything about what love is going to look like, how to be the same and different? Is there some constant, eternal constant nature of love, but also can the nature of love evolve as we evolve?
I think yes and no. I think love does not change. I think relationships change. So, like the
Oh,
way in
that's
which we
interesting.
perform love changes. But I think the emotion that drives it, I'd like to think at least, is a universal,
Because
and
love
is
is
something.
complicated. Sometimes when you
Mhm.
rely on each other to survive, love is like with a Caro and the robot. But I would argue the love she has with Levi, who gets the humanity returned, although he's not the same he was before, is kind of the most old fashioned form of love. I don't know.
Yeah, I think and I think most books, most stories are about sort of those core human principles or traits. It's about loyalty, it's about bravery, it's about
Yeah,
love. Like those are our heroic virtues, right?
yeah.
That inspire us. And even if people aren't particularly like that in their real life, I think they aspire to
And
that.
that's why Chaos is just a wonderful read because it has all those eternal themes in it in a really interesting and relevant today setting. So when talking about the robot, the robot, she's trying to free the people who were turned into super soldiers, half human, half not. She's in league, the main character in this prison planet, with a complete robot, GR81, who wants to
Mhm.
free the other robots, as it turns out, right? And when he gets destroyed in a way that saves her and she's crying, that's when one of the characters, human characters, said, she's not human but a person, which I just found very interesting, and that this robot develops humor, tries to soothe her injuries, and it seems like, are you making an argument that robots or androids can be sentient? Are you the same place Clara and the Sun turned out?
I mean, I think that is the future, right? I'm not necessarily saying Cylons are the future, but I think that is the direction that humanity is progressing. And whether it happens in, 10 years or 100, I think that we're not putting the limitations on what we're doing to prevent that from happening. And so I think that at some point it probably will. It just depends on what form it takes. And you've got also things like Murderbot, which, the wonderful, wonderful novellas, but also the TV show right now, that I think is another way to greatly emphasize, like, Murderbot is not a human. Murderbot is a person. Like, Murderbot has
That's why I had
personhood.
Victor say that.
Yeah.
We're trying to talk about whether animals or land has personhood right now. There is an environmental case about that. So Victory, who's with Victor, another human associate of Caro, has another take on that about the robot who said it valued its life so much. Again, it even has a life. I mean, that's a statement. It valued its life so much it was willing to give it for something it believed in. So you had a robot who believed in something that affected something other than itself, including a human. That really is the exact opposite of the doom scenario of AI, where they're going to decide at some point we're superfluous, so they're going to be programmed to disregard our human commands and then wipe us all out, which some like smart people really do believe. They're getting their like bunkers, their Sam Altman bunkers to avoid it. So you're pretty optimistic there that it's all going to come out okay.
I mean, hope springs eternal. I think this scenario too is a little different, that we see it with humans, just human to human interactions, that humans can be very insular against people that are not like them in some way until they actually interact closely with someone who is not like them. And then they realize that, hey, you're actually like me in all these overlapping ways. And so even though you are different from me in that one way that I thought was so big, it's really not big. And so I think those doomsday AI scenarios are when AI and humanity are sort of kept on separate ends of the spectrum. And in this book, they are literally down in the dirt, together. Yeah. And so that offers, I think, if you have created a construct that is capable of empathy, which to me, that is personhood. It's not necessarily even thinking. It's being able to have that empathetic. And I know some people are not particularly capable of empathy, but
I was going to bring that up. And like, I tend to share your optimism on balance. People are good. The best could be appealed to them along with the worst. When they see themselves in another person, that's the way Martin Buber described God. You do have Donald Trump. You do have Vladimir Putin. You do have Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, you do have people who actually will look at other humanity and ignore the humanity and be programmed to destroy. So I guess that's going to be the big contest, right? And we're going to need more novels like this.
Exactly. It's always a battle between, the noble heroic virtues and the villainous virtues. And we hope that Norse mythology doesn't lead us in that direction in the end with like the bad happening. We hope we end with
we're talking about heroes and specifically heroines in chaos, which is the book we're talking about right now on Dateline New Haven with author Constance Fay. You make a point of having female characters who are strong and complicated and not perfect and exciting. And in I think the way you put it on your website was like romantic protagonists, like actual people, female leads who should be funny, reckless, competent, damaged, and compassionate. Above all else, they should be confident as they tackle insurmountable odds. So that's sort of a goal of yours in writing these books, right?
Absolutely.
So how does that tie into your own personality? I know you've had this really interesting life where you've been like a writer adventurer. You said you fenced with sabers, thrown knives, flown hawks. What do you do in technology and like warrior life in real life?
I'm in medical devices. So I'm in the medical side of technology. I have an engineering background. But I think this is going to sound weird because this inspiration actually started way, 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 way long ago when I was a very little girl and my dad read me stories at bedtime. And the stories that my dad told me were gender swapped versions of classic AI. He would tell me gender swapped John Carter of Mars or gender swapped Tarzan, a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs. But, they were stories that's what I thought it was until I got a lot older. I thought that these were female characters and female stories and that women took that position in that genre. So I was very surprised when I started reading that genre and was like, oh, not so much. And so I do make a concerted effort to, it's something that I see a lot in literature that we're doing better at now. But even stories that have a female protagonist, she's not doing a lot. She is there, the story is revolving around her. She'll sneak up against the bad guy and bop it on the head while someone else is distracting him. So it's not like she's completely passive, like way back in the day stories might have had female characters, but she's not driving her own story. And I definitely wanted to pay special emphasis to female characters that were driving their own stories, who were messy. They weren't just, strong female character, and that's all they are. My first two books, the leads are sort of the pew pew shoot 'em up type. Caro's not really that type. Caro's an engineer. She can't hit, I think it even says like she can't hit the side of a spaceship if she's standing right in front of it. That's not her thing.
But there is a woman who can. Victory. Yeah.
Yes, Victory. And she constantly compares herself, Caro constantly compares herself to that kind of person and is like, oh, well, this is what being good at your job means. This is kind of this is what I should aspire to be, because all these people who I admire and who I know are like that. As the book goes on, also learns that what she does has immense power and immense potential, and she doesn't have to be standing, there with the wind in her face and a gun in her hand, that there's other ways to be heroic. So
do you see yourself in Caro, like an imagined version of yourself with a combination engineer and mercenary warrior?
Yeah. She's much cooler than I am.
Of
but
course,
yes, it was challenging for me actually with the writing, because I went into it convinced that everyone would hate Caro, because Caro spends the first two books being quite judgmental, which is a trait she shares with me. And I will note that she's also very right in all of her judgments in those books. But also, I think she is the character that is probably the most like me psychologically. I'm not running around alien planets rescuing super soldiers.
But you have visited 13 countries.
Yes. But I think that it was harder for me to see her in perspective because of that.
Well, do you think those are qualifications for writing, the job of writing science fiction, to have part of you that's the engineer and part of you that's the adventurer?
For me, it is useful. I think everyone approaches it differently. But I personally find a lot of inspiration in that.
I find a lot of inspiration in the book. It's a really great read. Chaos by Constance Fay. It's on Bramble Tor Publishing. It's an imprint of Macmillan. What next for you for this book?
I'm working on something new next. So nothing I can officially say about it, but
different genre.
Sorry?
Is it sci-fi?
No. It's branching into the fantasy side of things.
All right. Well, good luck with it. And thanks for writing a really interesting book. Got me thinking. It was fun to read in the warm glow of the light. Holding it in my hand. Constance Fay, thanks for joining us today at Dateline New Haven. Thanks to Harry Dross for working the commands. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.